A resonance method review of Last Tango in Paris premiere was on October 14, 1972, in New York City, by Vladislav Alexander Stefan.
Only Marlon Brando could have done it. And Maria Schneider. And Bernardo Bertolucci. Sexuality and the Consciousness of Time. Jeanne, a young unrestrained Parisian, a Cupid arrow struck by Paul. Paul, an older American, manipulating and ferocious. Suddenly, the parrot caws. Jeanne pulls the trigger by instinct. Jeanne shoots Paul dead. Paul, hitting the flat line. Flatline death to flatline to die. Paul, at the door of hell. Or paradise. Jeanne, unrestrained, yes, but not naive. I don't know his name, she says. That's true, Jeanne never learned his name. Paul never wanted to know her name, would never tell her his name, too. Jeanne will go on with her life, but with Paul deeply embedded in her heart. The living one can never win the dead one.
Last Tango in Paris in a few words or more. Marlon Brando asks, "Hey America, what do I mean to you?"
Not only Marlon Brando, but every American asks, "Hey America, what do I mean to you?" We love America, and we want her to love us back. Bernardo Bertolucci, says Stefan, died on November 26, 2018, just a month or so after we had finished this video version, 2018, of my previous, 2011, resonance review, of Last Tango in Paris, 1972. I present this work, 2018, as the celebration of the lives of the great artists. Marlon Brando, April 3, 1924, July 1, 2004, Maria Schneider, March 27, 1952, February 3, 2011, and Bernardo Bertolucci, March 16, 1941, November 26, 2018.
This is La Jolla Cove, my favorite place to take a walk in La Jolla. This is my runway, or a catwalk, or a ramp, so to speak. I'll be walking here and telling you the story about the Last Tango in Paris movie, as I see it, of course.
Marlon Brando, on Last Tango in Paris, in an interview with Ian Johnstone, 1977.
You made a film, Last Tango in Paris, which wasn't big budget, but was commercially successful. And it said something about human relationships. Wasn't that worth doing?
I never could figure out what that movie was about.
Marlon Brando never could figure out what that movie was about. Well, I could figure out, so I think. I saw that movie as the mosaic of 1001 stories. So I wrote a resonance review, as I named it, about that movie. Basically telling 1001 stories connected with that movie, so to speak. It is my first theoretical work on the history of cinema.
Last Tango in Paris, in a nutshell. Story in a nutshell. Paul, a middle-aged American adventurer, meets Jeanne, a 20-year-old Parisian woman, in the apartment for rent. A Big Bang type of an emotional sexual adventure ensues between the two. It ends up by Jeanne killing him, accidentally, in her mother's apartment. Last Tango in Paris is the film that only Marlon Brando could have done it, and Maria Schneider and Bernardo Bertolucci too. The film brings a new perspective on sexuality of an older man and very young woman, and their consciousness of time. In the following, I use this film to discuss some general aspects of the filmmaking art and filmmaking science and technology. This movie brings the shift in the way sexuality, sex, and sex perversions are depicted in the film, but with a deeply philosophical background, which makes the film impossible to imitate. Tango was unique then, and is unique now. Last Tango in Paris was followed by a number of films with a very liberated treatment of sexual scenes. Tango brings the paradigm shift as to the treatment of sexuality in film. It brings explicitly sexuality of a Don Juan, or a Faust type. I do not have in mind here only nudity. Reference 1, for Last Tango in Paris, Marlon Brando was nominated for the Oscar, Best Actor 1973, no win, and Bernardo Bertolucci, Best Director 1973, no win. Reference 2. They did not win, I think they should have. It is not clear to me whether they had joined the post-Oscar bash. Now, the advice for the wannabe with the famous: you may sneak into the Oscar ceremony itself, that is possible. But you can only dream of sneaking into the post-Oscar bash, the Vanity Fair. The bash. That is. Reference 3. Reference 1. HIDEAWAY. In the Czechoslovakian proto-porn, ecstasy is often quoted as performing the first nudity act on the screen. But, not really, nudity on the screen was not discovered in ecstasy. Reference 2. Galkin and Jim Piazza. The Academy Awards, the complete unofficial history. This book is neither authorized nor endorsed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Reference 3. Trevor White, editor. America's Elite 1000. The Ultimate List. Millennium Issue. The very first time I saw the movie Last Tango in Paris was in 1973, in France. I was accompanied with a female friend. She would sing Me Capri, beautifully. The movie was a strong emotional experience for me. I was young then, and the sexuality of a young woman and an older man was quite an interesting topic for me, and it still is. Second time, I saw the movie in the States in 2011. Reference 4. It was a strong intellectual experience this time around, connected with the topic of the consciousness of time. One of my favorite topics. The year 1973 and the year 2011 are two different times, two different rhythms of time, so to speak. The difference in my impressions of the movie is, naturally, due to the flow of time. The best editor and the best revealer of the layers of truth. Last Tango in Paris is the movie about a middle-aged American in Paris, by the name of Paul, Marlon Brando. Profession: the adventurer of his own kind. His baby lover is Jeanne, Maria Schneider, a Parisian, very young, very spontaneous, very sexy. Reference 5. The story is by Bernardo Bertolucci, the movie director. Reference 6. As I was watching the movie second time, in my imagination I was enveloping, so to speak, the story of Paul with the story of Don Juan and Faust, or Faustef. I was resonating with Don Juan and Faust, and Faustef, so to speak. The general theme of Last Tango in Paris overlaps, in essence, a Don Juan and a Faust, or Faustef, motif. A young woman, Jeanne, in the movie, just about to be married, is involved in a sexual and emotional relationship with another man. Don Juan, Paul in the movie. It is always a young woman, the epitome of purity and raw sexuality, who proves to be the excellent material for a Don Juan and a Faust type of experiments. Reference 4. In early January 2011, I saw Last Tango in Paris on the International Movie Database website. It was free of charge. By instinct, I started to make a sketch for this essay. This time I saw much more in the Bernardo Bertolucci directing, and in the actings of Marlon Brando and young Maria Schneider. Maria Schneider died on February 3, 2011. Reference 5. This is not a stereotype movie review. I have my own intellect-emotion frame into which I am dragging the events of the movie. I name the method as the resonance method. Accordingly, this is a resonance method review of the movie, in plain English. A movie review and more. My intellect-emotion frame is defined by the Don Juan and the Faust legends, the two of the landmark topics of the Western intellect and emotion. And my fiction fantasy story, Dr. Faustef. The emphasis is put on sexuality and the consciousness of time. Reference 6. The movie is produced by Alberto Grimaldi, based on the story by Bernardo Bertolucci, who is also a screenwriter, with Franco Arcali, and director. Director of photography is Vittorio Storano. Music is composed by Gato Barbieri. The premiere of the movie was in New York City on October 14, 1972. Last Tango in Paris appears to me as the story of the American Don Juan, Don Giovanni, in the 1970s. Reference 7. The film was the sign of the times, I would say. Enhanced sexuality leads to an enhanced consciousness of time, and vice versa. The scums from the dawn of the human race, Adam and Eve, had become aware that they would die in the flow of time. Sexuality had brought them the consciousness of time. With the consciousness of time, with the flow of time, came human creativity of all kinds, scientific and artistic, as the tool for the fighting against human mortality. Reference 7. It was a decade of a high-pitched sexuality. It was the Big Bang in the development of the pornography industry. The 1960s were the years of the love, peace, flower sexuality. Idealistic and revolutionary. The 1970s were the years of different sexuality, of the Eve's crazy apple type. Sophisticated and infectious. The behavior of the human race as a whole, through the ages, is similar to the behavior of humans, its constituents, in their lifetimes. Just like humans, the human race changes its moods. Sometimes it feels sexy, and sometimes does not. My fiction fantasy story on Dr. Faustef versus Lucifer, in the fight for immortality of the human race, 2002, depicts a physicist who achieves immortality. The 1970s, the decade of the Eve's crazy apple sexuality, sophisticated and infectious. The 1960s, the decade of the love, peace, flower sexuality, idealistic and revolutionary. The 1970s, the decade of Eve's crazy apple. Like any other decade, don't you think? Snake, Lucifer. In the lower right-hand corner, there is a cornuto, a cuckold, a horn carrier, Paul. Important for the movie. Jeanne is a 20 years old, passionate woman. She wants, naturally, to know everything about her lover. She wants to know his name and other things. Paul does not mind her telling him about herself, but names he does not want to hear, not even their names. That stuff on her.
What am I doing in this apartment with you? Love?
Well, let's say we're just taking a flying fuck at a rolling donut.
So you think I'm a whore?
I think you're a what? A what? A whore?
A whore.
You mean whore, right?
Yes, a whore. Whore.
No, you're just a dear old-fashioned girl. Trying to get along.
I prefer to be a whore.
Why were you going through my pockets?
To find out who you are.
To find out who you are.
How old are you?
I'm 93 this weekend.
Oh, you don't look it.
Oh, thank you.
Have you been in college? You want to know why you don't want to know anything about me? Because you hate women.
Oh, really?
What they have ever done to you?
Well, either they always pretend to know who I am, or they pretend that I don't know who they are, and that's very boring.
I'm not afraid to say who I am. I'm 20 years old.
No! Jesus Christ, what is your brain? Stop this, it's, Heilsmaul Schweinehund. Shut up. I know it's tough, but you're gonna have to bear it. I think I'm happy with you.
I think I am happy with you, says Paul. This is a heavy statement, says Stefan, by an aging adventurer playboy. Had Jeanne been more experienced with men, she would have understood the sincerity of Paul's statement, and their relationship would have gone toward a rose garden. All the mysteries, says Paul, that you are ever gonna know in life are right here. I wish, says Stefan, that Paul had in mind this. Life in our time world, the world of duality and manyness, benign, harmonious, and malignant, or, like, is addressed by the nature of nature through the female-male duality, the sweetness-bitterness of it, that is. To understand and comprehend this duality, the most complex of them all, including both benign and malignant aspects, is an enormous task to be achieved in every human life. Alas, most of us humans leave the time world without having ever understood a bit of the mystery of the female-male duality, even with the help of great human minds. It is something like this: you do experience the female-male duality in any capacity, and you are good to go. There is nothing else there for you to be learned in the time world.
The stories on Faust and Don Juan, the landmarks of Western civilization.
Faustus, Faustef, stories address this topic. Don Juan and Faust are among the landmark characters of the Western intellect and emotion. Sexuality and the consciousness of time. I do not pretend to be a specialist in what I have written in the following. Regarding the sacred books, the text is constructed so as to facilitate discussions in the essay. The Eve's Apple. Many sacred books deal with the sexuality, consciousness of time topic, either explicitly or implicitly. The Bible begins with this topic. It starts with Adam and Eve. They are expelled from paradise into the time world, our world. Eve's apple, that is sexuality, given to her by Lucifer disguised as a snake, is the cause and the trigger for the expulsion. Paradise, the timeless world, is loss for them. Sexuality and the consciousness of time is, however, their gain. In terms of genomic physics, the Eve's apple could be interpreted as the genetic manipulation, the change of Adam's and Eve's genomic code, that brought them different sexuality from the one they had in paradise, and an enhanced consciousness of time. The Bible states that Adam and Eve were created some 6,000 years ago. It's possible that at that time the genomic manipulation was performed on existing humans, and the Adam and Eve race was created. This could be a prelude to a scientific explanation of the Bible. We know that Newton spent better part of his life in the effort to unravel the mystery of the Bible and Kabbalah mysticism. Adam and Eve have lost immortality granted to them by the Supreme Being. In the time world, our world, Adam and Eve swiftly realize that they are going to die, namely, that time is not on their side. By the grace of the Supreme Being, Adam and Eve swiftly realize that their sexuality can help. They can have children. Namely, they can have the procreation immortality. Not everything is lost thanks to the grace of the Supreme Being, Adam and Eve swiftly realize. In my fiction fantasy novel Dr. Faustef vs. Lucifer, in the fight for immortality of the human race, 2002, Lucifer manages via Eve's apple to acquire mortal human race, our human race, hoping to use it in his war against the Supreme Being. That was not to be. Human race rebels against Lucifer, calling him the devil. Dr. Faustef fights Lucifer, too, achieves immortality, defeats Lucifer. The Giver, the Supreme Being, appoints Faustef the Master Guardian of the creation, Lucifer's former post. The Last Tango in Paris story, in a nutshell. Paul, a middle-aged American adventurer, meets Jeanne, a 20-year-old Parisian woman, in the apartment for rent. A Big Bang type of the emotional sexual adventure ensues between the two. It ends up by Jeanne killing him in her mother's apartment. France 1973, USA 2011. The very first time, says Stefan, I saw the movie Last Tango in Paris was in 1973, in France, with a female friend. She would sing me Capri, it's finished, beautifully. The movie was, says Stefan, a strong emotional experience for me. I was young then, and the sexuality of a young woman coupled to the sexuality of an older man was quite an interesting topic for me, and it still is. Second time, I saw the movie in the States. It was a strong intellectual experience this time around, connected with the topic of the consciousness of time, one of my favorite topics. In the early January 2011, I saw Last Tango in Paris on the International Movie Database web. It was free of charge. By instinct, I started to make a sketch for this essay. This time I saw much more in Bernardo Bertolucci's directing, and in the acting of Marlon Brando and young Maria Schneider. She died on February 3, 2011. The year 1973 and the year 2011 are two different time domains. Two different rhythms of time, so to speak. The difference in my impressions of the movie is, naturally, due to time, the best editor and the best revealer of the layers of truth.
American Don Juan.
Last Tango in Paris appears to me, says Stefan, as the story of the American Don Juan, Don Giovanni. In the 1970s Last Tango in Paris was the sign of the times, I would say. Wedding-day Adultery. Wedding-day Adultery is the Don Juan motif par excellence. Don Juan sexually seduces women on their wedding day, reflecting his disgust with the family as a social unit, and with society in general. Paul has the same sentiment toward family and society due to his miserable childhood experience. Jeanne runs away from the shooting session depicting her wedding day, a reality show directed by Tom, her fiancé, straight into Paul's arms. It is the 7th day since she met Paul. Yesterday she did not see him, because she had decided not to see him anymore. Her rhythm of time directs her real-life action. She, a runaway bride, stands outside the elevator, telling Paul, in the elevator, that she wanted to leave him, but it had not been easy. She asks him for forgiveness and she asks him whether he still wants her. He opens the door. The runaway bride enters the elevator.
Intuitive encounter of Paul and Jeanne.
The movie begins with Paul walking toward Jules Verne Street. He looks as if wandering around like a mad scientist whose lab has been just blown up. His wife Rosa committed suicide yesterday evening in their own hotel. Now he will never know her. His Don Juanian experiment with her has come to an end, a good reason for the depression. Jeanne walks hastily behind him, passes him by, but he has caught her eye. She turns back, looks at him for a moment, moves on. Her woman's sixth sense does not fail to recognize the danger, Paul's true nature, a Don Juan nature. Women have a subtle capability to evaluate character of a man, much better than a man would evaluate a man. Paul feels her, too. He has chosen his prey. This is a typical intuitive encounter. After this type of encounter, the two can go wherever they please, but the law of chance will bring them together in the future almost with the certainty of been done. In my first viewing in 1973, I had an impression that he had followed her. In the 1970s, if a young beautiful woman would pass by you, it would not be freaky, at least in Europe, to follow her for a while and then approach her politely with, "Excuse me, miss." I know that many hot relationships had started that way. In 2011, however, I did an analysis and found no support for my first impression. The frame-by-frame sequence shows the loss of continuity, the logic of sequences is blurred, the glitches in editing, or a test just art. As to the loss of logic in the movie, I wondered, as a child, by watching the Ford S westerns, why the Indians had not shot the horses to stop the stagecoach chase. Now I know, it is art. Paul is an American, 45 years old, almost the age of Marlon Brando, 48, in 1972, sophisticated and complex, handsome, brushed by the winds and rains of many a place worldwide. He was a boxer, an actor, a bongo player, a revolutionary in South America, a journalist in Japan, a socialite in Tahiti, where he learned French. After Tahiti he moved to Paris 5 years ago, and married Rosa, a woman with money. A hotel owner. Rosa is now dead, she committed suicide. Paul's father was alcoholic, a tough man, a bar fighter, a super-masculine man. His mother was very poetic, and she was alcoholic, too. She taught him to love nature. He remembers his childhood days with sorrow. Of his childhood, he remembers but Dutchie, his big black dog, with joy. Jeanne is Parisian, 20 years old, exactly the age of Maria Schneider, in 1972, passionate and direct, voluptuous, and spontaneously sexy. She's young and fresh, she's like the beginning of time, he thinks. Us much older than her, can be her father. He is tired, Rosa is gone. He is like the ending of time, he feels. Through Jeanne he can be the conqueror of time. Sex with her is a good vehicle, only sex with her, no emotion, he intuitively conceives. Jeanne's father died in 1958 in Algeria as a colonel in the French army. He had green eyes that she adored and shiny boots that she liked to touch as a child. He was handsome in his uniform. She worshipped her father, she still does. Of her childhood, she has great memories. She lived, after her father passed away, in the suburb of Paris, in a family house, which is now taken care of by Olympia, her nanny, a compendium of domestic virtues, faithful, admiring, and racist. She remembers her dog Mustafa, her cousin Paul, and her first sexual experiences with joy.
Hideaway for the Flesh and Blood Prayer.
Paul, the master seducer, rents the place. It's the sort of a hideaway, a timeless place only for two, for her and him, just like paradise would be for Adam and Eve, or a scientific laboratory. In what follows, says Stefan, I get the comments on the movie as it unfolds. Should you say that sometimes I'm missing the point, I would reply with this, well, that Bernardo Bertolucci did it his way. He always does. Good for him, and good for us too. The Big Bang of Sexual Lust. Short 10 to 15 minutes have elapsed, and these two complete strangers are in each other's arms. It's a passionate hug, a sexual act of a Big Bang intensity similar to the moment when our universe came into existence. He has initiated it with the power of the master seducer, on the level of Don Juan or Casanova. Yet, all has looked spontaneous. In the afternoon, after the Big Bang morning, Jeanne comes back to return the keys of the apartment. Paul has expected her returning, but not exactly for that reason. He knows that she wants to unveil the mystery of her unexplainable behavior with him. He knows that she feels liberated with him. Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil. A key is the symbol of freedom, openness. As she returns the key, she places her liberty into his hands. The hideaway for her is the room with an ever-open door, no need for a key. Yet, she feels a captive of that liberty with him, and intuitively she asks, shall I ever be free in a room with an open door? This is Baudelaire's motif in his Flowers of Evil. A contract with the devil. You and I are going to meet here, says Paul, without knowing anything that goes on outside. Are you scared? He asks. No, she replies, confidently. It looks as if she's just signed a contract with the devil, akin to the contract between Faustus and Lucifer. The master seducer. Why does she agree? It's a woman's heart, welcoming the mystery. It's a woman's curiosity, always eager to see what's inside the drawer. It is Jeanne's thirst for the knowledge of a man, who plays with her heart, like a virtuoso violinist would play on his violin. She knows she has been seduced. On that she surrenders, but she must know the heart of the master seducer. Here are, says Stefan, Jeanne, and Paul, getting ready for the flesh and blood prayer. She is taking off her boots, he is opening his zipper. I do see here in some extent the touch of a comedy moment. This reminds me of the Zen Buddhist erotic novel in the 17th century China. I had read this book in Serbo-Croatian language in 1980. Liu, the Carnal Prayer Mat. I saw Paul, says Stefan, as the big-time loser, through the spirit of that book, which tells us this. If you dedicate your life to the sexual delights among the beautiful women, ultimately you will end up to be in the garden of dead roses. Your Playboy fame is but the poultry fame, in which the truth is lost, and in which you ultimately lose yourself. Paul even lost his life. Paul has easily seduced Jeanne. This is an adventure for her. She wants freedom through the adventure with him, not to be free from him. This is a true woman's soul, incompatible with false Don Juan's Faust's soul, which seeks the absolute freedom. Paul stimulates in her, in a subtle way, the instinct for freedom, but through the adventure with him, meaning she's free, yet she is in bondage by him. The wisdom of marriage and love. Under the influence of Paul, Jeanne acquires the wisdom of marriage and love. When marriage does not work, then you have to fix it like you would fix a car. Love is when the two retire to a secret apartment, a hideaway, and become man and woman. That's exactly what she's doing with Paul. The triggering of woman's sexuality. The 3 steps of the master seducer. Paul is interested in Jeanne's first sexual experience, the triggering of her sexuality. She tells him about her first love, her cousin Paul, about first time she had an orgasm. This is what any master seducer would be interested in knowing. This is, as knowing her rhythm of time. The second step is to pull her into his rhythm of time. From that point on she feels free, yet she's his captive. He can abandon her any time he pleases. These are the 3 steps of the master seducer. Don Juan, the liberator of women. The liberation is a complex and a long-term process in woman's life. Naturally, it is a different process in different epochs. The woman liberation motif is dealt with in all walks of art. It seems that woman's true liberation can take place only with a man on her side, rather than on her own. That's what the Don Juan stories implicitly tell us. All his young lovers are in his arms solely of their own free will, and they enjoy it. The core of the Don Juan story is in the folk legend, reflecting the wisdom of the people. That's crucial. Jeanne tells Paul that he does not want to know anything about her, because he hates women. What have they ever done to you? She asks. Either they always pretend to know who I am, Paul answers, or they pretend I don't know who they are, and that's very boring. Scientific versus romantic relationship. Paul's attitude toward the nature of woman and relationship with them is scientific, cold, and dissecting, as opposed to a romantic one, warm and inclusive. He is a Don Juan, Faust, and women adore him for that. Most of them, that is. The process of acquiring knowledge involves a certain period of time. You must be in the rhythm of time, so to speak. If you lose the rhythm of time, the process is interrupted, and irreversibly corrupted. You must start all over again. In a purely romantic relationship, a warm and an inclusive, the process is perpetually up and down, but never stops. The flow of time in a romantic relationship. The time flow manifested through the duration of the relationship with a lover is very important for a woman. This is the form of her consciousness of time. In that first Big Bang sexual act with Paul, stimulated by him, actually, Jeanne's consciousness of time was enhanced. She continues to endure in the time flow of that very event. Paul knows that, and plays with it. He plays with her consciousness of time. Love. When a child loves you, then the love back is automatically expected by the child. It's so simple. If a man, emotionally unavailable, is next to a woman, then a woman, by the motherly instinct, gives the man even more love. Jeanne's reaction to an emotionally unavailable Paul is both of a child's and of a woman's type. With Paul she will never be alone, she thinks. The message of Christ. All you need to do to make a person love you is to love that person unconditionally. This is the deepest truth, the message of Christ. Unfortunately, humans do not operate on the deepest level in everyday life. Death. You won't be free, says Paul, of that feeling. Of being alone until you look death right in the face. This reflects Paul's high consciousness of time. It's the state of mind when you realize that your death is a friend, the most reliable of them all, the one who will never let you down, the one with whom you can never be alone. Death is that special man in a woman's life, and that special woman in a man's life. She, the death, never stands up to rendezvous with her lover. Paul actually tells her of the paradise lost, of the lost human immortality, the reason for Don Juan's wrath. To Cornutos. Cuckolds. Paul and Marcel in a philosophic discourse. In Italy, people often express their dissatisfaction with somebody's behavior, or otherwise, by referring to that person as a cornuto, a horns carrier, a he-cuckold, or a cornuta, a she-cuckold. In general, a he-cuckold is a male whose lover is sexually cheating on him. A she-cuckold is a female whose lover is sexually cheating on her. There is, in the lower right-hand corner, the horns carrier cornuto, cuckold. On this painting, is the painter giving us the hint that with the Eve apple human sexuality comes naturally the cuckold, cornuto effect. Here is the story about two cornutos, Paul and Marcel. Paul and Marcel are in Marcel's apartment, next to Paul's and Rosa's apartment. Marcel have had an affair with Rosa almost a year, not a passionate one, though, as Marcel says. Apparently Marcel's ex-wife had not been better than Rosa. Two cornutos, identical bathrobes. Rosa wanted their bathrobes identical, says Marcel. And she wanted him to drink bourbon, as Paul did. Marcelo tells him that they've got a lot of things in common. The two Cornutos are now trying to explain philosophically why women do strange things, why Rosa has cheated on Paul, committed suicide, for example. Paul tells him that Rosa often talked about him. She had a strange violence, says Marcel. Why was she unfaithful to you? You can't believe that Rosa killed herself, says Paul. It's hard for me to believe, too. As Paul leaves, he says, really, Marcel, I wonder what she ever saw in you. Paul may continue to wonder, but Rosa did find something in Marcel. A cheating wife, a desperate wife. Paul did not interfere in Rosa's cheating affair with Marcel. He did not want to interrupt his experiments. This is a Don Juan trait. Paul was not jealous as long as his experiment was coming along as planned. Actually, Rosa was not a cheating wife, she was a desperate wife for love of her husband.
Tango. The Rhythm of Time.
Jeanne is in the hideaway. Paul is nowhere to be found. He is gone for good. He has abandoned her. She is devastated. She feels so lonely, calls Tom, her boyfriend, filmmaker, to join her. She makes an immediate marriage plan with Tom, but her heart is the faraway heart focused on Paul. This is the morning on the 8th day, since she met Paul. Paul is outside the building. He saw Jeanne coming in, and he saw Tom coming in, and leaving. Now Paul is waiting for her to get out in the street. He will encounter her, restart his game. Once he had abandoned his young lovers, Don Juan would have returned to evaluate the level of the emotional damage, to do a forensic job, in essence. He had known how a young girl's broken heart could be unpredictable, and yet fixable. Unlike Don Juan, Paul has never returned. This is the first time that he actually does it. The rhythm of time in our world. All events in the time world, our world, follow the rhythm of time. Romantic relationships follow the rhythm of time, too. Romantic rhythm of time is a subtle rhythm, quite easy to lose. Both partners are in the hands of the rhythm of time, hence that mystery of the romantic relationships. You mess around with the rhythm of time, you mess around with yourself, unless you are Don Juan. Is Paul really a Don Juan? Have Paul lost the rhythm of time? Jeanne has left the hideaway. She is now in the street, walking. Paul is walking behind her. This is the inverse scene of the movie's opening scene. He intersects her, suggests her to start all over again in a different way, more mundane way, the way she loves to hate. It's finished, she says. I am getting married. The Last Tango. They are in the tango hall now, a pitiful place, as she describes it. In accordance to the pitiful place, Paul behaves pitifully, too. He is not himself, not exactly a Don Juan, not Jeanne's liberator, not her emotional pillar. She feels empty somehow, but still trying to be vigorous. They drink. Tango rhythm appears to be a therapy for their emotional distress, each of them in their very own distress. Every kind of music has a therapeutic power for a particular kind of an emotional distress. The contestants are now dancing the last tango. You know, says Paul. Tango is a rite. You must watch the legs of the dancers. The tango of physics. Speaking of tango and of the legs of the dancers, here is the excerpt from Dr. Faustef vs. Lucifer, in the fight for immortality of the human race. Tango is simple but subtle, says Faustef, the same way physics is simple but subtle. By looking at the tango couples, you can learn how to dance with your problem in physics. The walking and crossing. The basic elements of tango you may use in walking and crossing your problem in physics. Walking and not stepping on the toes of your partner is easily accomplished if you look wide around. In physics, that means looking outside the box. In the crossing, you actually encompass your partner's body. In physics, that means looking at the problem from all sides.
Consciousness of time.
Time. What is time? Swiss manufactured, French hoarded, Italian squandered, Americans say it is money, Hindus say it does not exist. You know what I say? I say time is a crook. Time is a crook. Time is a crook.
I wouldn't say, Stefan comments, that time is a crook. You must put a significant effort to be in harmony with the time flow. In other words, you can truly be a friend of time. It's true that you do not know what time flow brings and what time flow takes away. Time flow brought to Paul and Jeanne a week or so of a passionate bumpy-road relationship and took away Paul's life.
What am I doing in this apartment with you?
Jeanne's question, "What am I doing in this apartment with you?" is the consequence of her enhanced consciousness of time, as she shares her life with Paul. Your "what am I doing?" question is a consequence of your enhanced consciousness of time. You can use this question to instantaneously trigger the enhancement of your consciousness of time. Francis Bacon, the founder of the scientific method, had clearly seen the importance of the consciousness of time in the development of civilizations. In the Bible, it is said that there is a right time for everything. This is found in Ecclesiastes, probably authored by Solomon some 3,000 years ago. Apparently, Solomon the Wise had a subtle consciousness of time. Human sexuality. Death, human mortality, and human sexuality, Eve's apple, are described in the religions of Abraham, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam through primal sin, the trigger and the cause of the Adam-Eve expulsion from paradise into the time world, our world. In the time world, however, sex liberates from the fear of death, albeit only temporarily, giving you a short-term feeling of personal immortality. In the same measure, the restraint from sexuality, all sorts of celibacy, also liberate from the fear of death. Accordingly, through primal sin, humans gain consciousness of time and sexuality. Sexuality, in turn, enhances consciousness of time through the short-term feeling of immortality. Human sexuality branches into a great number of particular human sexualities, as treated in the movie, A Raw Sexuality of a Young Jeanne. Paul's combined Faustian and Don Juanian sexuality, the adultery of Rosa, a restrained sexuality of Jeanne's mother, and prostitution. Freud is right, it seems to me, says Stefan, in his soft statement, namely, that sexuality is a highly important ingredient of human nature. He is wrong in his hard statement, namely, that sexuality is of ultimate importance. The human nature can be reduced to human sexuality. Following Freud's opinion, humans appear to be the captives of their sexuality. I hypothesize that sexuality has its core in the consciousness of time. The consciousness of time, it seems to me, is the core not only of sexuality, considered here to be an aspect of human creativity, but also it is the core of human creativity in general, including all kinds of creativity, scientific, artistic, financial, and similar. It gives humans the freedom of a creative life with almost unlimited possibilities. In the soft sciences, the arbitrariness of statements is accepted and usually categorized as opinions. That's not the case with the exact sciences, such as physics, whereby the arbitrariness is reduced, albeit it still exists. The probabilistic quantum mechanics is overwhelmingly successful physics tool. Yet, Einstein, a vehement denouncer of the probabilistic method, says that the more quantum mechanics successful, the sillier it looks. The Don Juan Syndrome. In spite of the explicit sexual scenes and the rowdy nudity scenes, neither Paul's nor Jeanne's sexuality is revealed. True, sexuality is never revealed by nudity. Nudity is just that. Nudity. Marlon Brando and Bernardo Bertolucci know that. That's why the exaggeration of nudity in the scenes is taken easily. Sex itself in the Don Juan Syndrome is not the goal of the action. It is not the thirst for sex, but the underlying thirst for knowledge of a woman's heart through sex, that drives a man of a Don Juan type. Marlon Brando is a magnificent American Don Juan. He laughs, he cries, he is experimenting with Jeanne, and with his maid, and was experimenting with his wife, and was experimenting with many more women worldwide. Opposite to the spirit of Don Juan, Paul eventually and genuinely reveals his love to Jeanne, his prey. By doing that, Paul ceases to be Don Juan, and with that less interesting in the eyes of a young Jeanne. Don Juan, the researcher into woman's psyche. It's not correct to say that Paul wants to have sex with Jeanne without knowing her. Paul wants to know her through sex is a correct statement. In such an emotional setting, direct verbal information between the two is not needed. The information flows through different channels, the beauty of that sink, for example, or the electric shock-inducing gramophone, or that rat in the bed. Bernardo Bertolucci has a deep knowledge of Don Juan's complex psyche, and he makes use of it in his film. Paul's monologue. Marlon Brando presents the Don psyche best in his monologue over the dead body of his wife. He lost her, that's sad, and Marlon shows it, and now he will never know her, never. That's the worst, and Marlon rages. Not just that she killed herself, but she killed his experiment, too. That's Don Juan at his best. It is 4 o'clock in the morning on the 8th day since Paul met Jeanne. Paul is in the room where Rosa is laid out in a bed surrounded by beautiful flowers arranged by her mother. He is having a monologue over her dead body, being in an ambivalent state of his mind and heart. He is sorry for her death, yet he is angry with her, because he lost the experiment. The monologues of emotional ambivalence are by far most intense. Just remember Hamlet's "to be, or not to be." The Jeanne's monologue, after killing Paul, is of the same type. A self-induced contraction of time. Rosa has committed suicide, left no note. Her death is a mystery for Paul. And she herself is now the mystery for him. He feels as if carried away in the river of time, his very own river of time. With Rosa's death his consciousness of time is invigorated. Paul experiences a spontaneous self-contraction of time. He never had children with Rosa, actually he cannot have children now, he feels sorry for that. The children would transcend the barriers of time, they would ease the barriers of life and death, and expand time itself. This could be an example of a self-induced contraction of time, seeing your life as a whole, in the moment of hitting the flat line. It could be an equivalent to the word rosebud, which Cain uttered as he was dying. Rosa, Ophelia, Gretchen. Paul calls a dead Rosa fake Ophelia. Rosa is also Gretchen of Goethe's Faust. Gretchen chooses death by the executioner rather than to be with Faust, who does not truly love her. Paul and Rosa appear as Faust and Gretchen. Even if the husband lives 200 years, says Paul, he is never going to be able to discover his wife's real nature. I will never discover the truth about you, never. The personal touch of 3 generations in resonance. Last Tango in Paris had acquired life of its own, and, as such, it will remain. Here we have 3 passionate persons with the ages almost symmetrically distributed over a 30-year period, or so. Maria Schneider, 20, Bernardo Bertolucci, 32, Marlon Brando, 48. They are powerful specimens of 3 generations, almost brought into emotional and intellectual resonance, so to speak. Marlon Brando is a sexy man par excellence, he rarely smiles. He is a rebel par excellence, he rarely grins. Maria Schneider is a sexy young woman par excellence, she uninhibitedly smiles. She is a woman rebel par excellence, she grins frequently. They have different life experiences, and emotional capacity, that is felt in the movie. The enacted part, the personal touch of the 3 artists of 3 generations is undoubtedly the watermark of the movie. They gave us one of the landmark movies of the 20th century.
Paul's Flatline Day.
What happens in Jeanne's mind and heart in the period from being with Paul, in the tango hall, runs away from him, enters her mother's apartment, goes straight to the drawer with her father's gun, and shoots him. The fatal love. In the tango bar, Jeanne does have fun with Paul. Could it be that she misses his loving in the hideaway, but not necessarily him? Is this Baudelaire's The Fatal Love, whereby the lover's loving is missed, but not the lover? Is this Baudelaire's French Gothic par excellence? Somebody has to die. The finale of the movie, Jeanne kills Paul, is something that no viewer could ever see coming. Somehow, it's too much, the logic of the event is weak. The movie in its climax becomes purely emotional and, as such, it stays in one's heart. No viewer, however, is aware that this is a Don Juan story. Such an ending, for the screenwriter and the director, is the most natural thing. Bernardo Bertolucci knows, I postulate this, I don't know what Bertolucci knows. That he is making a movie about Don Juan, of the 1970s, somebody must die, but who, and when? Jeanne's father is dead already, he died in 1958, in Algeria, to make Jeanne commit suicide? Goethe in his The Sorrows of Young Werther, allows Werther's suicide. Goethe also let Margaret, Gretchen, be executed in Faust, Part 1, no. Jeanne is too young. That would be like extinguishing life itself, and repeating Rosa's case. Rational versus irrational finale. Paul could be let run over by a car, or a truck during the chase in the street. This would be more rational, such things do happen, but not so a dramatic event. Jeanne, also, could let be run over by a car. Paul will have lost his experiment, as he has with Rosa. These two possible endings would be something like a man and a woman meet, through one event of chance and part, through yet another one event of chance. That is the story of love that went wrong. Everybody knows it happens. Artistic and scientific temperament in the filmmaking. If I were Bernardo Bertolucci, I would do it that way. If Bernardo Bertolucci were me, he would do it, for sure, my way. Fortunately for us, Bertolucci did it his way. He chooses not a reason-driven finale, but the guts-driven finale, the finale that nobody will ever know clearly what really happened. The mystery of the movie has been sealed, and, as such, will always invite the curious individuals to unveil it. That's what you expect of art, the emphasis on irrational and mysterious. The pure rational, you expect from science. Science and art always trespass their areas, and it's always intentional regardless of what the two say. The film's director lets Jeanne kill Paul. It is as if the life of spontaneity is in the fight for its own life against sardonic and cynical life of Paul. This is the point whereby Bernardo Bertolucci transcends himself. His movie becomes the art with life of its own, not frequent occurrence in the filmmaking. Last Tango in Paris, by itself, transcends the creators with no effort on the creator's side. Now that Paul is dead, the finale of the movie is in Maria Schneider's hands, Jeanne's monologue. She does it superbly. Paul, Jeanne, the film's director, three pals. The finale of the movie is the masterpiece in itself, the masterpiece both in acting and directing. Three people are involved, Paul, Jeanne, and the film's director. You feel the personal touch, not only the creative one, of Marlon Brando, Maria Schneider, and Bernardo Bertolucci. It's obvious they have become pals in addition to the movie partners.
Our children. Will remember.
The Avengers of Adam. The director tells Paul to wobble out onto the balcony. Camera is following Paul. He walks unsteadily toward the balcony, saying, "Our children, our children, our children will remember." All said in the following is in my mind, the observer's mind, and, as such, represents one of many possible layers of truth that the film emanates. Paul does not mean Jeanne's and his children. He cannot have children. He could have them when he was younger, but he missed the opportunity. Does Paul talk about his sorrow for his lost procreation and mortality through children? Is Paul telling us that man through sex can never reach the bottom of woman's soul? Does Paul talk on behalf of Adam's sorrow for his lost immortality, of paradise lost, all due to Eve's apple? Is Paul repeating the words of Adam on his deathbed? Our children will remember what exactly happened in paradise. Does Paul tell us, secretly, that Adam himself chooses men throughout time, to carry the message of his sorrow and anger with Eve for lost immortality? Does Paul tell us about the Avengers of Adam? About the men, of a Don Juan type, that women adore? Women give them attention, love, gold, and diamonds, and receive from them exactly what they deserve, not exactly nothing. The most is spoken with the unspoken. Paul is at the balcony. The camera is facing him. See snapshot 10. The director tells Paul to try to speak, but be unspoken. The director is looking at his face. Paul sticks his chewing gum under the railing. Tries to speak, he is lame on speech, remains unspoken. He hits the flat line, collapses. The director is pleased. He hits the flat line, he dies. The most is spoken with the unspoken, that's Faust, Goethe. It is true you cannot have a Don Juan without a Faust around, and vice versa. Jeanne's monologue. Jeanne is inside. The director wonders if Jeanne's monologue should resemble Paul's monologue. No. He decides. Paul was emotional, angry, betrayed, hurt. The director tells Jeanne to stay relatively cold, confused, to cut the emotional thread with Paul. She does that. She starts her monologue, her face is in a close-up. I don't know who he is, she says. He followed me in the street. He tried to rape me, he is lunatic. Jeanne continues with her monologue. I don't know his name, she says. Lastly, Jeanne does not know his name. Paul insisted on that, he did not tell her his name, and he did not want to know her name, either. Paul wanted purely sexual relationship with her. At the end that proved to not be a good idea, he did want to know her name, but it was way too late, Jeanne killed him accidentally. She continues with her monologue, but her words are now muted. She has finished her monologue, director breathes the sigh of relief. He is pleased, he has now the movie's end frame. Paul's game of life. When Paul met Rosa he felt he could settle down, at least for a while. They got married. Life for Paul became something he always hated, a daily routine, but for the time being quite acceptable. The mind of a Don Juan, however, would not rest too long. Under his influence, the hotel would soon be transformed into a not quite a whorehouse. Rosa does not like it and neither do her parents. Paul studies those women, the queens of night. They love him, they feel safe with him. He helps them keep their customers in a good behavior. Rosa is going berserk. Sometimes he would go out into the vast possibilities of Paris and picked up a young woman, in the street, the bar, the tango bar. And he would not come home for days. He would rent a hideaway and start the experiment in the rhythm of time. He has been fascinated with the rhythm of tango since his days in South America. Once experiment had been finished, he would abandon the victim never to return. Wherever he went, he did his experiments, in Africa, South America, Asia, Indonesia. Rosa is dead now. He goes out to vent into the vast possibilities of Paris. As usual, things come to him without a particular effort on his side. Jeanne, young and beautiful, is coming his way. He has never wasted time. They are now in the hideaway, practicing the rhythm of time. The day of abandonment comes. He is not sure. He thinks he is happy with her. He leaves and returns. On his great surprise, he realizes that his rhythm of time has been lost. He has lost control of her. He has never returned before to a victim, and does not know what it looks like. In the tango hall, he is trying to regain the rhythm of time. He miserably fails. The message of Paul. Is Paul's method in acquiring knowledge about his women good? It seems that Paul never succeeds in unraveling the mystery of his women. He fails with Rosa, she kills herself. He fails with Jeanne, she kills him. For sure, there are many more cases not exactly like Rosa and Jeanne, as he was roaming around the world. Rosa remains mystery for Paul. Paul was mystery for her, too. She studied him. She forced Marcel to have the same bathrobe as Paul. She used her lover Marcelo as a tool to know Paul better. Rosa is not a promiscuous woman, she is a desperate woman for the love of Paul. She realized that she had failed and killed herself. Paul's maid also studies him. He is mystery for her. She is happy when the police tell her the secrets of Paul's life as he was roaming around the world. It seems wherever Paul goes, the mess is following him. His maid makes it sure that Paul knows what she knows about him. For Jeanne, Paul is the mystery. She wants to unravel it. She signs the contract, hoping that she will gain, eventually, as a trade-off, the knowledge about the mysterious man. This is a false motive. At one point she realizes that it is not to be. She resigns her studies and surrenders, saying that love is when the two retire to a hideaway and become man and woman. She follows the rhythm of time. Jeanne, a girl with a faraway heart. Paul makes a fatal error. He distorts the rhythm of time that he himself has dictated for both of them. He abandons the hideaway, leaving her empty-hearted. She wants the continuity of her experience with him. To that end she wishes to transform the hideaway, the place of chance with Paul, into the place of destiny with Paul. Now the inversion of sentiment in her heart has occurred. She is now a faraway heart girl to Paul. That's what Don Juan knows well, a sign that young woman is broken heart is starting afresh, and that a subtle seduction technique has to be applied. Paul fails to do that. Maria Schneider plays wonderfully the role of a faraway heart girl. Paul, you ain't Don Juan no more. Paul is not dancing to his rhythm of time. He tells Jeanne that he owns not exactly a flophouse hotel. Then, he tells her about his wife Steph, dear Lord, Paul. Then, he tells her that he is a good stick man, like she doesn't know. Then, he tells he cannot have any children. Come on, Paul. Really? You have lost it, man. You ain't Don Juan no more. You deserve to be slain. Jeanne's emotional pillar, Paul himself, has crushed down before her very own eyes. Paul raises many questions. Is a scientific study of each other all that woman and man want from each other? I would say, absolutely not. Is the romantic relationship a better choice, whereby the two are satisfied with what they gain, or lose? Is unconditional love for a woman by a man preferable to a man's cold knowledge of her soul? Is it more important to know than to gracefully embrace the joys and sorrows, and the mystery of the woman-man relationship? Is Paul's method in acquiring knowledge about his women good? I would say, no. The questions raised by Paul, however, sound as if he retorts, think about it. At the very end Paul does tell Jeanne that he loves her. Do you really, Paul? To get Paul's answer, you will have to go straight to the down below and ask him directly. Paul and Jeanne, forever. What Paul's experience with Jeanne will do for him when he has joined Don Juan and Faust in hell is difficult to say. But young Jeanne will certainly benefit in her life from encountering At the dawn of her adulthood, such a character as Paul, and from his sharing with her a week of his life, will be de facto present in her life until her flatline day.
The controversy.
In one scene of the movie, Paul facilitates his sodomizing of Jeanne by the use of butter. The scene has come to be referred in the history of cinema as the butter scene. The butter scene stirred up a part of the Italian public and led to the criminal legal proceedings. It is still an open question if this scene was spontaneous, unscripted, a snappy created by Brando alone, or was premeditated by Bertolucci. In the turmoil of the legal procedure against the movie, Brando stated, 1977, that he could never figure out what that movie was all about, and he kept himself out of the sight.
You made a film, Last Tango in Paris, which wasn't big budget, but was commercially successful, and it said something about human relationships. Wasn't that worth doing?
I never could figure out what that movie was about.
Maria was angry, stating that the scene was a bona fide experience for her, done against her free will. She was talkative to the media, and controversial, too. Bertolucci took the heat on himself alone, and he kept the wise stance on the whole issue. Some would comment that the butter scene was the creation of three gay persons, Bertolucci, Brando, and Maria Schneider. Brando's first wife Anna Koshfi had accused him of his homosexuality in their divorce procedure. Brando himself would confirm openly his bisexuality in one period of his life, and would add that he was not ashamed of it. Bertolucci's mentor Pier Paolo Pasolini was openly homosexual. Maria Schneider was bisexual, and her father, Daniel Jelen, was bisexual too, and he would encourage Brigitte Bardot to try it herself too, which she would categorically refuse. Pauline Kael writes a review of Last Tango in Paris, 1972, in the New Yorker, 1972, the most renowned review in the history of film criticism. Here is one part of the review of Last Tango in Paris by Pauline Kael, considered by many as the most renowned review in the history of film criticism. It appeared in The New Yorker magazine on October 28, 1972. Bernardo Bertolucci's Last Tango in Paris was presented for the first time on the closing night of the New York Film Festival, October 14, 1972. That date should become a landmark in movie history comparable to May 29, 1913. The night, The Rite of Spring, was first performed in music history. There was no riot, and no one threw anything at the screen, but I think it is fair to say that the audience was in a state of shock, because Last Tango in Paris has the same kind of hypnotic excitement as The Rite, the same primitive force, and the same thrusting, jabbing eroticism. The Last Tango in Paris review by Pauline Kael, The New Yorker magazine, October 14, 1972, is considered by many a cinema professional as the most renowned review in the history of film criticism. It's finished. Jeanne cries out loud to Paul as she is running away from him in the streets of Paris.
C'est fini, c'est la nuit de mon premier amour.